Good evening, you guys. Well, this is a case for Scientology crimes, that's for sure. And this is an ongoing case, so I have to preempt this with the word allegations. These are all allegations. They're not proven in court. There is some history. This is the case that Serge Delmar and Lara FM have been protesting in front of the courthouse when the hearings have been. There was a hearing yesterday which furthered it along. I'll get to what happened later, but I want to take the time to read through this. Probably won't read every word, but we're going to read most of it. It's a long document, so buckle up. The law offices of Graham E. Berry, is handling this case. It was filed 6/21/2023. That's not the original date. This is the amended date. There was a court plea before this, but this was the amended one. It's Superior Court of the State of California, in and for the County of Los Angeles. Jane Doe is the plaintiff versus Religious Technology Center, Scientology, Church of Scientology International, David Miscavige, an individual, Gavin Potter, an individual, Bridge Publications, and then there's some defendant does 6 through 100. I assume because they didn't have all of their names or want to include all of their names, they were just part and parcel to the suit. Their second amended complaint for damages, it was amended to read 1, negligence, 2, sexual assault, 3, sexual battery, 4, negligent supervision, failure to warn, 5, negligent employment retention, 6, intentional infliction of emotional distress, 7, fraud, and 8, public nuisance. As I said, this one is definitely a buckle up story, buckle up allegations. Trigger warning, there will be some tough subjects in here. If you feel you need to take a break or can't listen, I completely respect that. This is not easy to read. In fact, my blood pressure went up, my anger level went up just reading through this. I did not understand what Lara and Serge were truly representing as the protesters. So jury trial demanded. There's a public injunction based upon information and belief available to plaintiff Jane Doe at the time of the filing of the second amended complaint for damages. Plaintiff makes the following allegations. Repeat, allegations. Plaintiff Jane Doe is an adult female born in August 1974. Plaintiff was a minor at the time of the sexual abuse alleged herein. The name used by plaintiff is amended complaint. It is not plaintiff's true name, but instead a fictitious name used to protect the identity of the plaintiff, a survivor of childhood sexual assault. There exists good cause for plaintiff to use a pseudonym due to the harmful effect of the public disclosure of her identity and harm likely to be inflicted by the defendants upon Jane Doe. Plaintiff's undersigned counsel will provide the identity of plaintiff to all defendants. As such, defendants suffer no prejudice as a result of concealing her identity in the amended complaint and verifications. The now identified defendants are now being substituted for the Doe defendants named in the original complaint filed herein. And it goes on to describe each of the corporations: RTC, the Religious Technology Center, nonprofit corporation, its principal place of business, Los Angeles, California, operating under David Miscavige's direction. Senior Religious Technology Center officers, including those in the Office of Inspector General. I didn't know RTC had an OIG, but okay. oversaw and directed the management of the church affiliates, entities, and organizations, including the defendant entities herein. RTC and David Miscavige also oversaw and directed defendants' sprawling and pervasive investigative and policing operations, monitored members' behavior, and handled matters concerning the discipline and punishment of the members throughout all church-affiliated entities, groups, and organization. Little disclaimer, plaintiff Jane Doe is also involved in one of the plaintiffs in the civil action against RTC, Church of Scientology, David Miscavige, in the Chrissy Carnell Bixler case. At all relevant times, RTC headquarters was and is located 1710 Ivar, with the main office 19625 Highway 79, Gilman Hot Springs. Church of Scientology International is a nonprofit. CSI is controlled and directed by David Miscavige, directly and through Church of Scientology International's officers and other who report to David Miscavige. CSI's headquarters, 6331 Hollywood Boulevard. David Miscavige is an individual who serves as chairman of the board, COB, for RTC. Among other things, David Miscavige personally directed and continues to direct the management and operations of RTC. Upon information and belief, David Miscavige is believed to reside at the 6331 Hollywood Boulevard. Gavin Potter is an individual whose last known place of residence is Los Angeles. Bridge Publications is the publisher of the writings of Scientology, founder L. Ron Hubbard, and was, upon information and belief, the co-employer of Gavin Potter at the time of the events of the alleged herein. It is incorporated. Its purpose of placing Dianetics and Scientology books, lectures, and other religious materials in the hands of individuals and organizations worldwide at minimum cost and maximum speed. Bridge Publications is located and maintains its operations at 5600 East Olympic Boulevard, Los Angeles. Registered agent is Kendrick Moxon. Defendant Doe's 6 through 100 inclusive are individuals or business or corporate entities incorporated in or doing business in California or otherwise acting within the state of California whose true names and capacities are unknown to plaintiff, who therefore sues such defendants by such fictitious names, and who will amend the complaint to show the true names and capacity of each Doe defendants when ascertained. Each defendant is the agent, servant, and or employee of the other defendants, and each defendant was acting within the course and scope of his or her authority as an agent, servant, or employee of the other defendant. Defendants in each of them are individuals, corporations, partnerships, and other entities which engaged in, joined in, and conspired with other wrongdoers in carrying out the tortious and unlawful activities described in this amended complaint. Collectively, RTC, CSI, David Miscavige, Gavin Potter, and Bridge Publications are hereinafter referred to as the defendants. Jurisdiction and venue. The court has jurisdiction over the action pursuant to the California Code. Venue is proper in the court pursuant to California Code. See, when you're doing a suit, you have to find a cause, you have to find a victim, and you have to find where they're in the proper jurisdiction. At all times relevant here too, religious RTC through 100 inclusive were either residents of the state of California doing business in the county of Los Angeles and or otherwise subject to the jurisdiction of the state of California. Factual background. Please take time if you need to. The RTC Center and Church of Scientology International, along with a network of Scientology organizations affiliated with them, make up what is known as the Church of Scientology, or Scientology. Today, Scientology International is the mother church, directing all activities of all the other affiliated corporations and entities around the world. The religion is organized and operated through a global network of corporations, trusts, and unincorporated associations and organizations. The structure creates the appearance of a group of affiliated but decentralized and independently managed establishments operating pursuant to general authority bestowed upon them by CSI. RTC owns all church-related trademark and service marks and controls their licensing and use. It possesses the ultimate ecclesiastical authority over the international hierarchy. Scientology was created in 1952 by L. Ron Hubbard, the criminal, the felony. Following the publication of Dianetics, blah, 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 we know that. For Scientology followers, this is important. The writing of Hubbard must be strictly practiced and followed in a fundamentalist, orthodox manner with strict adherence to the policies, procedures, and practices, and I would include doctrine into this, as written and dictated by Hubbard. RTC, CSI, and Bridge are directly controlled by David Miscavige. These are important points to put into record. Upon L. Ron Hubbard's death in 1986, David Miscavige assumed complete control. His official title is the chairman of the board of RTC. Upon information and belief, it is known to all within Scientology that everything of import must be approved by David Miscavige and that his orders are unappealable and absolute. David Miscavige bears the ultimate responsibility for ensuring the standard and pure application of L. Ron Hubbard's technologies of Dianetics and Scientology and for keeping Scientology working, KSWs. Management and oversight of Scientology affiliated entities and operations is, on paper, vested in a watchdog committee consisting of upper echelon individuals situated within Church CSI, which has an OSA, Office of Special Affairs, that handles internal security and outside legal affairs and serves as the intelligence and spying operation. Again, guys, this is extremely important to get on paper, on record. Through its operative and agents, OSA tracks, monitors, and directs retaliation campaigns and ruinous litigation against defectors and critics of the church. The head of OSA and other OSA officers report to and take direction exclusively from David Miscavige and his senior RTC officers. The Commoner's Messenger Organization, CMO, is a group controlled and directed solely by David Miscavige that operates outside of the structure of the management of church-affiliated entities. CMO's primary function is to enforce defendants' policies pursuant to David Miscavige's direction, monitoring and management of all church operations, providing reports to David Miscavige and his senior officers, and relaying and enforcing directives from them to operational managers. Basically, everything flows up to David Miscavige. Auditing. Within the Church of Scientology, the goal for practitioners is to achieve the state of clear and operating thetan. Most people that are watching this are going to know what auditing is, but I'm going to read through a little bit of it so that way if you're not knowledgeable about it, that you'll get some type of an idea. To achieve a state of clear, or OT, operating thetan, Scientology members undergo auditing. The auditing process is based on the church's belief that humans are immortal and possess two minds, the reactive and the analytical. The reactive mind is where trauma and pain from all lives past and current resides. The analytical mind is a conscious mind. Per Hubbard's teaching, the reactive mind is responsible for anything and everything negative that occurs in a Scientologist's life. Basically, you're auditing to remove the state of being of the reactive mind so that way you are clear. The Church of Scientology International, CSI, maintains files with 3 folders on each Scientology member: ethics, personnel, and pre-clear. The pre-clear file contains information learned from auditing sessions and anything emotional, traumatic, or deeply personal shared by the member. The Scientology Sea Organization. The senior hierarchy of Scientology organizations, including but not limited to RTC, CSI, and Bridge, are exclusively staffed and run by an unincorporated paramilitary organization known as the SeaOrg. As the most senior officer in the SeaOrg, David Miscavige controls, directs, and supervises SeaOrg and its members. The SeaOrg was established in 1967, was given its name because one operated from several ships. SeaOrg was formed to assist L. Ron Hubbard, the felony, with advanced research operations and supervise church organizations around the world. The SeaOrg is entrusted to minister the advanced services of Scientology. Positions in the SeaOrg are analogous to that of members of religious orders and other religions. Upon information and belief, CSI doctrine and belief considers SeaOrg members equivalent to its clergy. Some SeaOrg members also have pseudo-naval ranks. For example, David Miscavige holds the rank of captain within the SeaOrg. Membership in the SeaOrg is voluntary within the Church of Scientology. Therefore, the SeaOrg must recruit members of the Church of Scientology to join its ranks. Upon information and belief, the SeaOrg targets children, some as young as 12 or 13 years old, for inclusion into its ranks. Scientologists seeking to join SeaOrg must sign a billion-year pledge, thus pledging eternal service to Scientology and its religious goals. Upon information and belief, SeaOrg members live communally with housing, meals, uniforms, medical and dental care provided by the church. I guess that's only if you, it's relative on the medical and dental care, and it's how you define medical and dental care. SeaOrg members give up all worldly possessions, wear only SeaOrg provided uniforms, and receive only a meager salary, a pittance, for grueling labor. I think I would have defined that a little bit better. That's okay, Granberry. Upon joining SeaOrg, members must discharge their parents as their guardians to become fully available to the organization. Members joining SeaOrg under the age of 18 are assigned a guardian by Church of Scientology International and SeaOrg. The actions of minors in the SeaOrg are closely tracked by a port captain who must clear every move of a member, including their jobs, where they'll live, all of which is maintained in their members' file. The culture within Scientology and SeaOrg is to punish those who divulge any information that would be overt or against the tenets of Scientology. An overt is an act or failure to act that leads to the injury, degradation, or reduction of self or others. Overts often lead the person committing the act to cover them up. The act of not revealing or talking about an overt is called a withhold. The withhold is seen as an act of dishonesty to the self and one's colleagues. Within the SeaOrg, a primary ethical concern is with handling overts and any resulting withholds. It is the duty of the SeaOrg members to report their own overts and withholds or any committed by others of which they become aware to their unit's ethics officer. Typical overts might involve negligence at one's assigned task, theft of church funds, or illicit sexual activity. All such overt acts are maintained in the SeaOrg's members' ethics folder. There was ethics, personnel, and pre-clear folders. Upon information and belief, SeaOrg policy considers illicit sexual activity to mean extramarital sexual relationships, including but not limited to sexual intercourse and heavy petting, as a serious violation of ethical policy. Upon information and belief, SeaOrg members are prohibited from engaging in extramarital sexual relationships or marrying outside the SeaOrg. The Rehabilitation Project Force, RPF, was created in 1974 for SeaOrg members who committed serious violations of ethical policy. SeaOrg members assigned to the RPF are sent to the SeaOrg work camps, where, upon information and belief, they are subjected to isolation, food deprivation, long hours of hard manual labor, and other cruel and unusual punishments. A member can be sentenced to RPF for anywhere from 1 to 10 years. The defendant's culture of child sexual abuse. Religious institutions nationwide have experienced serious problems with child abuse and the sexual exploitation of children. The RTC and CSI are no exception. The Church of Scientology International's aggressive practices and rules forcing secrecy upon all members have kept victims from coming forward even longer than abuse victims in other religious institutions such as the Catholic Church or the Jehovah's Witnesses. Yet, like those religious institutions, defendants' religious affiliation and doctrines do not provide a license for child abuse or sexual assault, nor can defendants insulate themselves from responsibility for the actions of their agents, nor the illegal effects of their rules, practices, or doctrines. Scientologists are expressly prohibited from contacting police or other emergency responders. This is so important to get on record. Any crime committed by any member. Upon information and belief, a policy exists within Scientology called ethics protection, which details why it is okay for the church to take no action when criminal acts occur, and more alarmingly, why the act of reporting such a crime to church officials or authorities is considered a high crime, subject to punishment. The prohibition of members from contacting authorities is so strictly enforced that phones within some Church of Scientology International facilities are reportedly disabled from dialing 911. Members are not allowed to make any calls without first utilizing a code so that each call may be tracked. Defendants' disdain for law enforcement is outlined in its policies. Police and courts offer an open-armed opportunity to the vicious and corrupt to establish themselves in a position of safety while satisfying their strange appetites of perverted viciousness toward their fellow man. Justice systems thereby become a sort of cancer which erode every splendid ambition and achievement of the decent citizen. Justice apparently cannot be trusted in the hands of man. Who is public enemy number one today? The FBI. Its obvious target is every opinion leader and public-spirited group in America. Through this and other directives, Church of Scientology International instructs its memberships that the only answer to a crime being committed by its members, including rape, sexual abuse, or child abuse, is Scientology and the teachings of Hubbard, not law enforcement. If senior officials in the RTC, Church, CSI, SeaOrg, or any other Scientology organization received credible evidence that child sexual abuse had occurred within the church, the officials cover up the incident rather than report the abuse to local authorities. Upon information and belief, in most instances, any alleged perpetrator of child abuse or sexual abuse was simply moved to a different Scientology base or location. Sometimes the alleged perpetrator was sent to RPF. Other times, no action was taken. Victims, however, are blamed for pulling in the abuse upon themselves and are forced to either apologize to their abuser for causing the assault or undergo a program to learn how they caused the assault. Upon information and belief, and given to the nature of the vast amount of information collected and recorded during auditing, it is highly likely that defendants have countless pieces of evidence describing child sexual abuse, both by perpetrators and the victims. Meanwhile, anyone who speaks out against Scientology, its practices, or its members is declared a suppressive person and subjected to attacks, harassment, embarrassment, humiliation, and other means of destroying someone's life via the Scientology tactic called fair game. The stated purpose behind this fair game policy is to silence individuals deemed enemies by whatever means necessary. A person who is declared fair game may be deprived of property or injured by any means by any Scientologist without any discipline of the Scientologist, may be tricked, sued, or lied to or destroyed. Defendants' policies and procedures encourage and instruct followers to ruin the individual utterly. The fair game policy in practice also directs followers to discover what the person really is defending and threaten it effectively. Nothing is off limits, including friends and family of an enemy of Scientology. The threatening fair game tactic scares followers into submission, prohibiting them from suppressing any discontent with Scientology or its leaders or members, even criminal behavior. The prohibition against contacting authorities created a culture and atmosphere in which the sexual assault of minors within the Church of Scientology International was tolerated and even facilitated. Defendants' practice of concealing the identities, propensities, and current assignments or residences of those perpetrators has enabled and empowered such abusers to sexually assault and or continue to place at risk countless minors in California and other locations where defendants conduct their business. Defendants have greatly increased the danger to children by failing to report childhood sexual abuse by their agents and or subagents to law enforcement. Defendants have further increased the danger to minors by attacking the credibility of victims who report abuse and by making affirmative representations and withholding information regarding the character and fitness of its volunteers, agents, and other representatives, and by failing to disclose negative information regarding sexual misconduct by such adults. Additionally, an unknown number of defendants, former agents, whose propensities defendants have been aware of for years but have disclosed to no one, would be able to continue to sexually assault and or place at risk countless minors at locations where defendants' former agents now reside. And to resume, it is common knowledge to members of Scientology that older members engage in illicit sexual activities with minors, the practice of both endorsed and facilitated by Scientology doctrine. The RPF punitive system routinely separates spouses from one another, sometimes for years. Recruits to the SeaOrg or CMO are expected to be free of any prior crimes, sexual interactions, or other tarnishing acts, making minors the most available and suitable candidates for recruitment. The prospect of being pressed into SeaOrg is so repugnant that upon information and belief, some minors would take certain illicit substances or claim to have taken them to make themselves ineligible. I know several of them that have taken drugs to make them ineligible. Finally, members of Scientology are prohibited from engaging in any contact, sexual or otherwise, with non-Scientologists. Disturbingly, children subjected to abuse are not treated as victims at all, but are instead led to believe that they have done something wrong to incite such abuse. Even in instances involving sexual abuse of a minor, upon information and belief, Scientology doctrine suggests that the minor, rather than the adult, is the sexual aggressor. Historically, the outcome of a disclosure of this nature resulted in the child being forced to apologize to his or her abuser for the child's role in their sexual abuse. The risk for sexual abuse of minors was especially high, given that the principle of Scientology, ingrained in members initially by Hubbard and subsequently by Church of Scientology International, is that humans are all immortal and reincarnated. Each person was a being billions of years old, and some in smaller bodies than other. Therefore, children are treated as though they are adults in the bodies of children. Defendants' conduct evidences a policy of secrecy that had created a culture of hidden sexual abuse to which plaintiff and many other minors have fallen victim. The acts of the defendants, as alleged herein, constitute a cover-up as defined by California Civil Code 340.1. The defendant Gavin Potter's history of problematic and unlawful sexual conduct with minors. At all relevant times, Gavin Potter was a SeaOrg member and a personal recruitment officer, a PRO, for RTC, publication arm Bridge Publications, a company run and operated by CSI, the Church of Scientology International. At all relevant times, Gavin Potter, in his capacity as PRO, was an agent and volunteer of RTC, the Church of Scientology International, David Miscavige, and Bridge Publications, and receiving value for his work for the SeaOrg, his stipend. Upon information and belief, Gavin Potter was deputized, tasked, directed, deployed, and ordered by RTC, Church of Scientology International, David Miscavige, and Bridge Publications to recruit minor females to become SeaOrg members, and was rewarded for his work. Effectively, Gavin Potter acted as an agent and employee of RTC, CSI, David Miscavige, and Bridge to recruit minors to the SeaOrg primarily through fear tactics. Upon information and belief, Gavin Potter would recruit minors by telling them that the earth was in danger of destruction and that only through the efforts of SeaOrg has humankind's ability to reside on the planet been extended. Another tactic Gavin Potter used was flirtation. Upon information and belief, Gavin Potter, an adult male, would flirt with minor females to induce them to join the SeaOrg. Gavin Potter was so successful that, for a period of time, he was recognized as the top recruiter for SeaOrg. Gavin Potter's success in recruiting minors was widely known within the SeaOrg and among all the defendants. He was allegedly so successful that his minor female recruits were commonly referred to as bridge babes, a phrase coined by David Miscavige. Upon information and belief, these minor females served as a further recruiting ground for men in Religious Technology Center and CSI to obtain wives. For the period of time, Gavin Potter was assigned a partner in his work for Bridge Publication, an individual who also was appointed as Jane Doe's guardian upon her joining SeaOrg because of her status as a minor. Jane Doe's life in Scientology. Jane Doe was born into the church in 1974. Her entire life was dictated and controlled by RTC and CSI, abusive policies, procedures, and rules. Jane Doe's parents were active members of RTC from her infancy. Jane Doe was indoctrinated into the teachings of RTC from a very early age. By the time Jane Doe was 7 years old, she was spending her summers with her aunt, who was a deputy commanding officer for the Manor Hotel, owned by CSI and operated by SeaOrg members. Soon thereafter, it was ingrained in Jane Doe that she too would become a SeaOrg. When Jane Doe was 14 years old, Jane Doe traveled to Clearwater, Florida for additional training in RTC and CSI facility. While attending this training, Jane Doe was approached by a member of a SeaOrg and asked to formally join the SeaOrg. SeaOrg recruiters aggressively recruit young children, some as early as 12 years old, to join the organization. Jane Doe joined the SeaOrg when she was 14 because she felt obligated and that she lacked any other choice but to join. In 1991, when Jane Doe turned 16, her position in the SeaOrg was formally activated, and she was sent to Los Angeles to become a receptionist at the L. Ron Hubbard Life Exhibition. At the time she was activated, Jane Doe was again in Clearwater, Florida for training. While returning to California, Jane Doe experienced regret regarding her decision to join the SeaOrg. Therefore, instead of immediately traveling to Los Angeles as instructed, she returned to her parents' home. Members of the RTC and the SeaOrg soon realized Jane Doe was not following orders, so Gavin Potter was sent to her parents' home. At the time, Gavin Potter was at least 10 years Jane Doe Sr. and a respected SeaOrg recruiter. Gavin Potter began grooming Jane Doe, still a minor, through the onboarding process of SeaOrg called Arriving, which involved numerous sign-offs by defendants' staff, volunteers, and agents, and required Jane Doe to discard all possessions but for a hygiene kit. New SeaOrg members are provided a blue jumper and then subjected to hard physical labor for several weeks, after which, if they successfully complete the process, they are routed in. Gavin Potter, through his work with Bridge Publications and with the assistance of his partner, who was also Jane Doe's guardian, convinced Jane Doe the world was ending, and in his role with SeaOrg, arrived her into SeaOrg. Soon thereafter, Jane Doe began working 16 to 18-hour days as a member of SeaOrg. One evening, as she was leaving a meeting with a defendant-owned facility, Gavin Potter approached Jane Doe and asked for a ride home. At the time, she was 16. Jane Doe felt obligated to give him a ride given his position of authority in the church. Jane Doe did not consider Gavin Potter's request unusual because she considered him like an uncle as he was older, had been married previously, and had a child. From that point forward, Jane Doe regularly drove Gavin Potter home after work. It was during these car rides that Gavin Potter began sexually abusing Jane Doe. At no point during any of the assaults in her vehicle did Jane Doe consent to those acts, but she felt like she could not refuse because of Gavin Potter's position in the RTC and CSI and Bridge Publications and the SeaOrg. The first time Gavin Potter sexually assaulted Jane Doe, he leaned over in the car and kissed her on the mouth. Jane Doe had never had a boyfriend or done anything of a sexual nature with anyone. The sexual abuse by Gavin Potter progressed. I'm not going to read this soft porn. Upset from this incident, Jane Doe was late for work the next day. When questioned by a coworker regarding her tardiness, Jane Doe told her coworker about the sexual encounter with Gavin Potter. Per RTC Center and CSI strict rules, that coworker immediately told a Church of Scientology International manager, who then told Gavin Potter's manager. Due to SeaOrg policies and protocol regarding sexual contact between SeaOrg members, Jane Doe and Gavin Potter were given two options. 1, be branded RPF for a period of 5 years, or 2, get married. Jane Doe knew that being sent to the RPF would be so devastating and intolerable that she felt coerced, but not willingly consent to marry Gavin Potter. That same day, Jane Doe's port captain arranged for Jane Doe, Gavin Potter, and Jane Doe's mother to travel to Las Vegas to complete the marriage. Jane Doe's mother witnessed the marriage. The port captain explained that the wedding could not take place in California, as that would require both parties to see a counselor or psychologist to determine the mental capacity of the minor to marry. Blah, 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 blah. That didn't happen. They went to Vegas. The RTC and Church of Scientology International knew that such an inquiry would involve questions as to the couple's relationship, where they would live, and how they would support one another, none of which Jane Doe could answer, which would result in a rejection of the marriage application. Nor did defendants want to divulge any of this information to the court. Upon information and belief, defendants routinely transported minors to and from Las Vegas for marriages to avoid any such requirements. Jane Doe did not tell friends or family she was married. She only told her co-workers and her mother. After the brief ceremony, the group immediately returned to Los Angeles. Jane Doe went back to work the night of her wedding. Jane Doe was scheduled to work until 11:30 p.m. She volunteered for the late night cleaning crew that night to avoid having to meet her now husband, Gavin Potter, at the Manor Hotel, owned by RTC and CSI and run by the SeaOrg. The Manor Hotel is also known as the Church of Scientology Celebrity Center. The stay at the Manor Hotel was organized by Jane Doe's port captain, whose responsibility was to manage every aspect of her life, basically her slave master, including signing off her berthing or living arrangements. At the end of her shift, Jane Doe was presented with completed staff paperwork signed by both her port captain and her guardian, assigning her to sleep with Gavin Potter at the hotel. Jane Doe had no say in this arrangement and did not believe she had the ability to say no. That night, Gavin Potter had intercourse with Jane Doe. Jane Doe did not want to have sex with him, but felt coerced and compelled because of the forced marriage. After that night, Jane Doe went back to living with her parents. She did not live with Gavin Potter the entirety of the marriage. Periodically, Jane Doe and Gavin would have sexual intercourse. Each and every time they had sexual intercourse, Jane Doe did so because she felt coerced. Jane Doe became pregnant at age 19. Upon information and belief, the RTC and CSI prohibited SeaOrg members from becoming pregnant. The SeaOrg was not equipped with appropriate health care for children or child care facilities, leaving children largely unsupervised, resulting in accidents that defendants did not have the funding or facilities to care for. Additionally, many children were subjected to neglect and molestation, prompted extensive child protective service investigations and legal issues over the years. Therefore, in 1986, upon the death of Hubbard and when David Miscavige took over, a SeaOrg order was issued declaring no more children could be born by SeaOrg members. For this reason, Gavin Potter asked Jane Doe to get an abortion, which she refused. Jane Doe was eventually able to escape Gavin Potter and the RTC, CSI, and David Miscavige, but not until she was 23 years old. She escaped with her daughter. Jane Doe successfully divorced Gavin Potter in 1997. After the divorce was finalized, the court awarded child support by Gavin Potter, which she was not permitted to waive. The RTC, CSI, and David Miscavige required Jane Doe to sign documents stating she would never seek to collect or enforce child support against Gavin Potter. The RTC, CSI, and David Miscavige's involvement in enforcement of that agreement further confirms their support, authority, and ratification of Gavin Potter's acts. To this date, Jane Doe has never collected or enforced child support against Gavin Potter. Jane Doe has endured the consequences of her abuse at the hands of her defendants her entire life. Jane Doe suffers from severe emotional distress, post-traumatic stress syndrome, and other emotional injuries for which she seeks continuing treatment. The defendant's opportunities to prevent perpetrator sexual abuse of plaintiff. Defendants were well aware of the risk Gavin Potter and men like him posed to minor females like plaintiff. Despite this known or knowable risk, defendants allowed Gavin Potter to continue his role within SeaOrg, including access to children through recruiting and otherwise. Despite this knowledge, defendants failed to take reasonable steps or to implement reasonable safeguards to avoid acts of childhood sexual assault. While working as a SeaOrg member and otherwise participating in church-sponsored programs, Jane Doe and her parents relied on defendants for her protection. Defendants and the ability to discipline, terminate, or report Gavin Potter to law enforcement. As such, defendants had a duty of reasonable care. In addition to a duty of ordinary care to prevent the sexual abuse of minors by its agents, staff, volunteers, and representatives, and to protect children from a general risk of harm of sexual abuse by the same individuals. Yet, in fact, Jane Doe was abused by Gavin Potter in the course of her work for SeaOrg at the hotel owned by the defendants in which she was required to stay. In particular, defendants, through the internal hierarchies that form the rules of order for their organization, were long aware of not only the potential for widespread sexual abuse of children within the religious organization, but created opportunities for such sexual abuse to occur in that defendants specifically recruited attractive minor females into an organization that required cohabitation. In this case, defendants not only created a culture in which sexual abuse was allowed to occur, tolerated, and not reported, but specifically enabled and directed the sexual abuse of Jane Doe by arranging and coercing her underage marriage, including under threat of punishment through RPF, and by assigning and requiring her to live with Gavin Potter. It was reasonably foreseeable that minors attending defendants' programming or joining the SeaOrg might be sexually assaulted by defendants' agents, representatives, or volunteers. Defendants knew or should have known that adult members of the SeaOrg were engaging in sexual act with minors. Upon information and belief, it was common knowledge amongst SeaOrg members that older members, all of whom were adults, engaged in sexual acts with minor recruits. Defendants were also on notice specifically of the risk that Gavin Potter would abuse minor females within SeaOrg. Gavin Potter was known by defendants and within SeaOrg as a top recruiter, having received awards for arriving large numbers of young females. Defendants were aware of these facts before Jane Doe was sexually abused and forced to marry Gavin Potter. Prior to her forced marriage to Gavin Potter, Jane Doe resided in a SeaOrg dormitory with 10 other young girls, many of whom were recruited by Gavin Potter. Upon information and belief, each of the girls was forced to marry an older man. Gavin Potter was married and had a child prior to sexually assaulting Jane Doe. Upon information and belief, his first wife left or was dismissed from RTC and CSI upon her divorce from Gavin Potter. The compelling state interest in preventing childhood sexual abuse. I'm not going to read that. I'll let you read through it. The first cause of action, negligence. While plaintiff was entrusted in defendant's care, Gavin Potter engaged in unwanted and illegal sexual conduct in contact with plaintiff while plaintiff was a SeaOrg member, and Gavin Potter was an agent and volunteer for each of the named defendants. The defendants had a duty to protect the plaintiff and a duty to properly supervise her when she was entrusted to the defendant's care as a SeaOrg member. Prior to the abuse alleged herein, defendants by and through their agents, servants, and employees knew or had reason to know that plaintiff was a minor, and had reason to know or were otherwise on notice of Gavin Potter's unlawful sexual conduct, and that he was an unfit agent, and still placed him in a position to solicit young girls into an environment in which sexual assault and battery were commonplace. Defendants failed to take reasonable steps and failed to implement reasonable safeguards to avoid acts of unlawful sexual conduct in the future by Gavin Potter and the defendant's other agents. We're getting to number 2 here. Childhood sexual abuse. Between 1991 and 1998, while plaintiff was in custody or under the control and supervision of defendants, including Gavin Potter, engaged in unpermitted, intentional, harmful, and offensive sexual contact against the plaintiff in violation of the California Child Victims Act. As a result of repeated sexual abuse, plaintiff has suffered and will continue to suffer physical injury, great pain of mind and body, shock, emotional distress, physical manifestations of emotional distress, embarrassment, loss of self-esteem, disgrace, humiliation, and loss of enjoyment of life. Have suffered and continue to suffer spiritually, were prevented and will continue to be prevented from performing plaintiff's daily activities and obtaining the full enjoyment of life. The third cause, child molestation, unlawful penetration, and sexual battery. I'm not going to read through that. We know what all of those things mean. Fourth cause, negligent supervision, failure to warn. Defendants had a duty to provide reasonable supervision of its volunteer employee and or agent Gavin Potter, and to use reasonable care in investigating him prior to placing him in a position to recruit young girls for the SeaOrg. Additionally, because defendants knew or should have known of the heightened risk Gavin Potter posed to all minors, defendants had a heightened duty to provide reasonable supervision and protection to minors. And the next cause of action, negligent employment retention. Defendants had a duty not to retain and continue to allow Gavin Potter to act as a volunteer and agents of the church, given his dangerous and exploitive propensities. They should have fired him, just like they've done in several other cases. They should have fired him. Defendants' conduct alleged herein and the defendants' implementation of their policy of secrecy illustrates wanton and reckless conduct and a conscious disregard for the rights and safety of the plaintiff and others minors. Sixth cause of action, intentional infliction of emotional distress. Beginning in 1992, Gavin Potter engaged in unpermitted, intentional, harmful, and offensive sexual contact upon the person of plaintiff while an agent of defendants who each knew or had full opportunity to learn that he had sexually assaulted plaintiff and that he had previously or subsequently sexually assaulted other minors. Seventh cause, fraud. Defendants knew or had reason to know of the sexual misconduct of Gavin Potter. Defendants misrepresented, actively concealed, or failed to disclose information relating to sexual misconduct of Gavin Potter as described herein. Defendants also made affirmative representations regarding Gavin Potter's character and his fitness to work directly with minors through SeaOrg and Bridge publications. Defendants intended that potential recruits for the SeaOrg and or their families rely on their representations that Gavin Potter was fit for the role in which they placed and rewarded him. Eighth cause, public nuisance. Defendants have in the past or continue to affirmatively conspire and engage in efforts to conceal knowledge they possess from the general public regarding acts of childhood sexual assaults committed by Gavin Potter and defendants. Pursuant to Penal Code 290.46, the public has the right to know registered sex offenders' names, aliases, photographs, dates of birth, and residential addresses so that the public can identify such men and take protective measures on behalf of their children. Punitive damages sought against the defendants and reservation of rights. I'm not going to read through this either. Prayer for relief for compensatory damages and the amount to be proven at trial, for damages for past, present, and future emotional distress, for past, present, and future out-of-pocket costs, reasonable attorney fees, interest permitted by law, statutory or civil penalties permitted by law, for trouble damages pursuant to civil code, for the court to enter an order requiring defendants to be immediately cease the wrongful conduct set forth from continuing to employ known or suspected sexual predators, placing known or suspected sexual predators in functions or environments in which contact with minors, so dated June 7th, 2023. So using that court case and knowing the court that it was being held in, I pulled up the court proceedings, the case notes, all of the previous enactments, and then the future hearings. And there's been quite a few. The basic chronological timeline of this is it went through, it was amended. David Miscavige was added as a defendant. They tried to give him a summons. He wasn't able to be found. They finally said that he could be served at a pseudo address, so they finally served him. And then the defendants came back and asked for her not to be able to use a pseudonym, that she had to give her real name instead of Jane Doe. That was turned down. The judge, she had signed arbitration agreement papers. The first judge was just about ready to give a ruling to say, because they had asked for in the amendment that it be turned back to arbitration. The first judge supposedly in his notes was just getting ready to say that it was not going to be sent to arbitration. When the defendants asked for a new judge, the new judge came back in and said that he would take it under consideration. That was in October. In December, it was rescheduled. Yesterday, the hearing was held. That was 1/9/2025. And the new judge, Kevin C. Brazil, it sounds like he held that the arbitration should be dismissed, that this should go to trial. It is set for next week for a trial setting conference. It looks like in May there will be a non-reporting to where you don't have to go, but it will be a case review. So next Thursday on 1/16/2025 will be a trial setting conference, 8:30 in the morning at 111 North Hill Street, Los Angeles. This is an extremely important case. The reason, besides just the facts of a child bride and a child being raped, allegedly, and a child being forced to marry, is all of those notes that need to be put into court documents. This doesn't need to settle. Please don't let this settle. God, I pray this doesn't get settled. I pray that this goes all the way through and that everything gets recorded into the court documents. I know Serge and Lara have protested the child bride in front of the courthouses, and I hope they're going to be there next week. I hope that we have more representation next Thursday on 1/16, 8:30 in the morning. For those that are in the area, they could be there. That would be just optimal. And we will look forward to whatever comes out of next week, and we'll go from there. So with that, I'm going to close. I know this has been a long one for Scientology crimes, and this is all allegedly. Nothing's into court documents yet, but I appreciate the time that we've spent, and I hope that you got something out of listening to this. I was mortified and totally pissed off with the facts of this case. And I hope it stirs up a little bit of advocacy in you also. So with that, thank you. We're going to close it out for the evening.